We are a species with amnesia. We live on a planet that is haunted by the ghosts of a past it cannot remember. All around us, scattered across continents and buried beneath the sands of time, lie the clues to a grand and tragic history. There are impossible stone structures that defy our most advanced understanding of engineering, silent megalithic monuments that whisper of a lost technology. And there are the universal myths, the echoes of gods and giants and golden ages that resonate in the collective subconscious of every culture on Earth. We are surrounded by the evidence of a great forgotten chapter of our own story. Mainstream history and science have an answer for this, a simple and convenient one. They tell us that the ruins are the work of clever primitives, and the myths are the fanciful fables of superstitious minds. They tell us that no reliable, written record of this primordial age exists. They assure us that the full story of what came before our own recorded history has been lost forever, scattered to the winds of time, eroded by millennia of geologic change and fading memory. But what if that is the greatest and most convenient lie of all? What if the history of the world before Adam was never truly lost? What if it was simply relocated for safekeeping? What if the original, uncensored chronicle of the cosmic wars, the fallen kingdoms, and the primordial cataclysms was deliberately taken off-site, removed from this fragile and corruptible planet and placed in a secure, fireproof, and eternal archive? A vault so absolute that no flood, no fire, no empire, and no passage of time could ever touch it. And what if the gatekeeper of that archive, the one who has held this history in secret since before the dawn of our own age, was God Himself? Today we investigate the ultimate library, the forbidden archives of heaven, and the hidden truth that the history of our world was never lost, it was only classified. Before we venture into the uncensored chronicles, we must first establish a critical and foundational fact. The idea of a heavenly archive, a divine system of record-keeping, is not an invention of some obscure, extra-biblical text. It is a concept that is deeply and repeatedly embedded within the pages of the canonical Bible itself. The gatekeepers may have hidden the full extent and the ancient origins of this celestial library, but they could not completely erase the references to its existence. Throughout the Old and New Testaments, the inspired writers speak of a reality where the events of earth are meticulously documented in heaven. The prophet Malachi, in his final chapter, describes a book of remembrance that is written before the Lord, a scroll that records the names and the deeds of those who fear Him. The psalmist David, in Psalm 139, speaks of his own life being written in God's book before he was ever born. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. This concept reaches its ultimate climax in the final book of the Bible. The book of Revelation is saturated with the language of a celestial courtroom and its archives. In the Great White Throne Judgment, John describes how books were opened and the dead were judged according to what was written in those books. He speaks most famously of the Lamb's Book of Life, a divine registry that contains the names of all who are saved. Even Moses himself, the great lawgiver, understood this reality. In a moment of passionate intercession for his sinful people in the book of Exodus, he cries out to God, "But now, if you will forgive their sin, but if not, please blot me out of your book that you have written." The idea is clear and consistent. Heaven is not a place of fading memories. It is a place of permanent records. There is a system, an archive, a library where the true and complete history of creation is being preserved. The canonical Bible testifies to its existence, but it is in the silenced books that its true primordial origin and its staggering scope are finally revealed. To understand the true nature and ancient origin of this celestial library, we must now turn to our primary witness, the text that claims to be a direct and authorized transcript from the archive itself. We must once again unseal the Book of Jubilees. As we have seen in our previous investigations, this is not a book that can be easily dismissed. It is not a human retelling of Genesis. It claims to be a divine one, and its entire narrative is built upon the foundational premise that the history it recounts is not a memory, but a copy. The opening scene of the book sets the stage for this staggering claim. Moses is on Mount Sinai, in the midst of the fire and the cloud, in the very presence of God. But he is not just receiving the 10 Commandments. An angelic being, the angel of the presence, is dispatched to him with a specific mission: to dictate to him the complete and unabridged history of the world, from the first day of creation to the final judgment. And where does this angel get his information? He is not speaking from his own memory. He is not recounting stories he has heard. The text is explicit. He is reading directly from a set of pre-existing, divinely authored documents. He is reading from the heavenly tablets. This is the central, explosive claim of the Book of Jubilees. It asserts that the stories we read are not just stories. They are excerpts from a permanent, unalterable, and heavenly record. It presents itself not as a book about history, but as a book from the official historical archives of the universe. This is what makes its testimony so powerful and so dangerous to any system that seeks to control the historical narrative. It claims to bypass all human tradition, all scribal transmission, and all subsequent editorial processes. It claims to be a direct, declassified briefing from the throne room of God. And the first thing it declassifies is the very existence of the library itself. The Book of Jubilees does not just allude to a divine record, it gives it a specific technical name. It calls this celestial archive the heavenly tablets. This is not a poetic or symbolic term. Throughout the book, the heavenly tablets are described as the ultimate primary source, the foundational, pre-written chronicle from which all true history and all eternal law proceeds. They are, in essence, the master database of the universe. When the angel of the presence dictates the story of the patriarchs to Moses, he is not telling a story. He is reading a file. The language used is that of a scribe reciting a legal document. Events are not described in general terms. They are given precise calendrical dates, as if being read from a celestial project plan. The genealogies, the covenants, the laws, all of it is presented as a pre-existing, written reality that is now being revealed, not created. This concept of a pre-written history is one of the most profound and challenging ideas in all of sacred literature. It suggests that the story of our world is not an improvisational drama, but the performance of a script that has already been written. It points to a God whose sovereignty and foreknowledge are so absolute that the entire arc of cosmic history, from the rebellion of Lucifer to the final judgment, has already been recorded in his divine library. The heavenly tablets are, therefore, more than just a history book. They are a book of destiny. They contain not only the record of what has been, but the blueprint of what will be. And this is why access to them is so restricted. To read from the heavenly tablets is to be given a glimpse into the very mind of God, to see the hidden architecture of his plan. a privilege that is granted only to the most trusted of his servants, like Enoch and Moses. This is not just a library, it is the ultimate classified archive, and its very existence proves that the history of the pre-Adamic world was never at risk of being lost. It was simply stored in the most secure vault in all of creation. If this celestial library, these heavenly tablets, truly exist, then what is written in them? What kind of information is considered so foundational, so critical to the order of the universe that it must be recorded in an unalterable, eternal archive? The Book of Jubilees provides a detailed inventory of the contents of this divine library, and in doing so, it reveals the very priorities of the God who authored it. First and foremost, the tablets contain the blueprint of sacred time. The text repeatedly states that the perfect 364-day solar calendar, with all of its Sabbaths, its festivals, and its Jubilee cycles, is ordained and written on the heavenly tablets as an eternal law. This is a staggering claim. It means that the calendar is not a human invention or a cultural tradition. It is a cosmological and legal fact, a piece of the original divine constitution of the universe. Time itself, in its sacred structure, is a recorded and unchangeable law. Second, the tablets contain the great laws of covenant and morality. Jubilees asserts that the foundational laws, the prohibition of murder, the sanctity of blood, the laws of sexual purity, the command to honor one's parents, were not first given to Moses at Sinai. They were written on the heavenly tablets from the beginning. They are eternal principles applicable to all of creation at all times. The giving of the law at Sinai was not the creation of a new legal code. It was the revelation of a small portion of a pre-existing and universal one. Third, the tablets contain the chronicle of sacred history and destiny. They record the great acts of creation, the story of the angelic mutiny, the details of the flood, and the precise genealogies of the patriarchal line. But they also contain what is to come. They are a book of prophecy, recording the future judgments and the ultimate triumph of God's redemptive plan. The heavenly tablets are not just a record of the past. They are a complete and unabridged blueprint of God's entire unfolding plan for His creation. They are the ultimate story, written by the ultimate author, before the first chapter ever took place. If the Book of Jubilees is the account of a divine chronicle being dictated to Moses, then what is the Book of Enoch? How does this other great silenced witness fit into the story of the heavenly tablets? The answer, when we connect the dots, is both logical and breathtaking. If Moses was the authorized transcriber of this celestial library, then Enoch was its first authorized visitor. Remember the unique status of Enoch. He is the man who walked with God and was taken from the earth, not to die, but to journey through the 10 heavens. As we have seen in our previous investigation, this was not just a mystical experience, it was an educational tour of the divine government. And what is at the very heart of any government? Its archives. It is almost certain that Enoch, in his journey to the very throne room of God, was granted access to this same celestial library, this same repository of the heavenly tablets. This reframes our understanding of who Enoch was. He was not just a holy man or a prophet in the traditional sense. He was a cosmic scribe. He was the first human to be granted a security clearance high enough to enter the divine archives and to read from the primary source documents of cosmic history. The detailed accounts in his book, the names of the fallen watchers, the mechanics of the celestial clockwork, the prophecies of the final judgment, are not the products of his own imagination or mystical visions. They are the field notes of a scholar, the research of a historian who has been given access to the ultimate primary source. This is why his testimony is so detailed, so precise, and so confident. He is not speculating, he is reporting. He is transcribing what he has seen and what he has read from the unalterable record. This is also why his book was considered so authoritative in the ancient world. They understood that Enoch was not just another prophet speaking on earth. He was a scribe who had been inside the library of heaven itself. He and Moses, therefore, are not competing witnesses. They are two different scribes from two different eras, who were granted access to the same divine archive and were tasked with revealing different portions of its contents to humanity. The existence of this celestial library, these heavenly tablets, is a theological revelation of the highest order. It fundamentally changes our understanding of history, of memory, and of the very nature of truth. In our fragile mortal world, history is a perishable commodity. Records can be burned, memories can fade, and entire civilizations can be buried under the sands of time, their stories lost forever. We live with a constant and anxious awareness that the past is a fleeting and often unknowable thing. But the doctrine of the heavenly tablets shatters this human-centric and pessimistic view. It declares that in the economy of God, nothing is ever truly lost. The true and complete history of the world before Adam, the story of the first cosmic war, the chronicle of the primordial world, the dossiers of Leviathan and Behemoth, the full, uncensored history of the Watchers and the Nephilim was never in danger of being permanently forgotten. The Great Flood may have been a global memory wipe on a terrestrial level. It may have destroyed the physical evidence of that ancient world, burying its cities under miles of sediment. It may have shattered its civilizations, fracturing its historical memory into the distorted fragments that we now call myth. But the flood was a judgment on earth, not on heaven. It could not touch the primary source documents. It could not erase the original, unabridged manuscript that was safely stored in the fireproof, incorruptible archives of the celestial realm. This is a truth of immense and profound comfort. It means that our understanding of the past is not limited to the broken fragments that we can dig up from the ground. It means that there is a perfect, complete, and divinely authored record of all things, a record that God, in His own timing, can choose to reveal to His people. History is not lost. It is simply classified, and the books of Enoch and Jubilees are our first, tantalizing glimpse into that declassified, heavenly record. And so we arrive at the central, most difficult and most dangerous question of our entire investigation. If this celestial library, these heavenly tablets, truly exist, and if a perfect and complete record of all history is safely stored in the archives of heaven, then why is it a secret? Why is the history of the world before Adam a history of such profound and foundational importance, a history that explains the very origin of the cosmic conflict and the nature of the evil we face, so thoroughly hidden from the vast majority of believers? In our previous investigations, we have identified the human agents of this suppression. We have pointed to the gatekeepers, the rabbinic sages, the early church councils, the theologians of the Roman Empire, who, for reasons of theological tidiness and institutional control, chose to censor and marginalize these inconvenient truths. But the doctrine of the heavenly tablets forces us to look higher, to a level of authority that transcends any human counsel. If God himself is the author and the ultimate archivist of this divine library, then the ultimate responsibility for its classification, for the sealing of its most sensitive records, must lie with him. In this specific case, the first and most powerful gatekeeper is not a human committee. It is God. And this leads us to a stunning, profoundly uncomfortable, and borderline heretical question, the very question that forms the heart of our title today. Why did God himself keep this history a secret? This is no longer a simple case of a human cover-up. We are now investigating an act of divine classification. Why would a God of revelation, a God who has commanded his truths to be proclaimed from the rooftops, choose to withhold a revelation of this magnitude? Why would he give us a canonical record in Genesis that, as we have seen, is so clearly a redacted summary of a much larger, more complex, and more terrifying story? Why would he allow the full, uncensored history to be preserved in texts that he must have known would later be cast out, debated, and dismissed by the very institutions that claimed to speak in his name? To even ask this question is to move beyond a simple story of a human conspiracy and into the deep, mysterious, and often unsettling mind of the divine strategist himself. The suppression of this knowledge was not, in its origin, a human decision. It was, at some level, a divine one, and to understand the motives behind it, we must be willing to wrestle with a God whose wisdom is as vast, whose plans are as multi-layered, and whose methods are often as inscrutable as the 10 heavens that Enoch himself explored. To accuse God of being a gatekeeper, of deliberately hiding the truth, may feel like an act of blasphemy. But the scriptures themselves reveal that God operates according to a profound and consistent pedagogical principle, the principle of progressive revelation. He is not just a king who issues decrees. He is a master teacher who guides his students, humanity, through a long and often difficult curriculum. And a wise teacher does not reveal the final, most complex lessons of the course on the first day of class. God does not reveal all of his secrets at once. He reveals truth in stages as his people are spiritually and intellectually prepared to receive and understand it. Consider the arc of the biblical narrative itself. The full, explicit doctrine of the Trinity is not laid out in the Book of Genesis. It is only hinted at and is revealed with clarity only after the coming of Christ and the Holy Spirit. The complex legal code of Leviticus was not given to Adam in the garden. It was given to Moses at a time when Israel was being formed from a family into a nation and required a detailed social and religious constitution. The prophecies of the end times were not given in their fullness to the early patriarchs. They were unveiled in increasing detail through the prophets, culminating in the final complex visions of the Book of Revelation. In this same way, it is both logical and theologically consistent to believe that God, in his wisdom, chose to withhold the full, terrifying details of the pre-Adamic cosmic war from the early stages of human history. The fledgling human race, and even the nation of Israel in its infancy, may not have been spiritually prepared to grapple with a truth of this magnitude. To be told, at the very beginning of your story that you were born onto a battlefield, that the universe was already scarred by a celestial civil war, that powerful demonic forces were actively working to corrupt and destroy you. This is a heavy and potentially crushing burden. A wise teacher introduces the basics first. And the most basic, foundational truth that early humanity needed to grasp was not the complexity of the cosmic war, but the simple, powerful reality of one true Creator God. The principle of progressive revelation is a powerful explanation for God's initial silence. But there is a second, even more critical and strategic reason why the divine gatekeeper chose to focus the canonical narrative so tightly on the story of Adam. This was not just a pedagogical choice, it was a legal and moral necessity designed to protect the single most important concept in all of human history, the doctrine of human responsibility. Consider the alternative. Imagine if the book of Genesis began not with Adam, but with the full, uncensored chronicle of the pre-Adamic war. Imagine if the very first chapters detailed the prideful rebellion of Lucifer, the mutiny of the Watchers, the invasion of the Nephilim, and the origin of demonic spirits. If this was our foundational story, what would be the inevitable human response to our own sin? We would have the perfect excuse. Humanity would no longer be the author of its own fall. We would be the tragic victims of a war that began before we even existed. Every sin, every failure, every dark impulse could be and would be blamed on the overwhelming influence of these ancient supernatural forces. The serpent would not just be a tempter, he would be a scapegoat. The doctrine of personal accountability, the very cornerstone of divine law and justice, would be fatally undermined. We would be a race of victims, not a race of rebels. And so God, in his perfect and terrifying wisdom, performed a divine act of editorial focus. He did not lie about the cosmic war, but he placed it in the background. He deliberately and masterfully centered the opening narrative of the canonical Bible on a single man in a perfect garden with a simple choice. He did not remove the serpent, but he presented him as a mere tempter, not as a representative of a vast supernatural army. Why? Because God had to establish, first and foremost, a clean and undeniable legal precedent. He had to prove that humanity, in a state of perfection, uncoerced by demons and uncorrupted by giants, would still choose rebellion. Adam's fall had to be our own, an act of sovereign, free will treason, so that our responsibility for it could never be questioned. God did not hide the cosmic war to protect us. He hid it to indict us, to ensure that the record would forever show that our sin is, and always has been, our own. God's initial divine decision to focus the canonical narrative on human responsibility was a profound act of pedagogical and legal wisdom. He did not erase the history of the cosmic war. He simply chose not to make it the central focus of the foundational texts, preserving that knowledge in the parallel, uncensored chronicles for a later time of revelation. But what began as an act of divine, pedagogical discretion was later transformed by human hands into an act of absolute and institutional censorship. The later gatekeepers, the councils of the 4th century, and the rabbinic sages who followed, took God's relative silence and codified it into a permanent and unyielding policy of suppression. They were not operating with the same divine, long-term perspective as the original author. They were men with immediate practical concerns: the need to build a stable institution, the desire to create a simple and defensible theology, and the fear of ideas that were too complex or too mystical for them to control. Where God had been a wise teacher, withholding certain advanced lessons for a later time, the human gatekeepers became fearful censors, attempting to burn the advanced textbooks altogether. They took the books that contained this forbidden history, Enoch, Jubilees, and others, and they did not just set them aside, they actively discredited them. They labeled them apocrypha, pseudepigrapha, fanciful myths, dangerous heresies. This was a secondary and far more insidious act of censorship. God, in his wisdom, had classified the information. The human gatekeepers, in their fear, attempted to delegitimize and destroy it. They took God's pedagogical decision to focus the Genesis narrative and twisted it into an excuse to declare all other histories heretical. They did not just hide the history of the pre-Adamic world, they made it a crime to even believe in it. And in doing so, they created the very historical amnesia that we, in our own time, are now being called to reverse. So how should we, in our modern era, view these ancient and controversial texts? For centuries, we have been handed only two options by the gatekeepers of tradition. We can either accept them as divinely inspired scripture, placing them on the same level as the canonical Bible, a position that most believers are rightly hesitant to take. Or we can dismiss them entirely, as the gatekeepers did, labeling them as dangerous, heretical fictions that should be avoided. But our investigation has revealed a third and far more powerful option. We should see the books of Enoch and Jubilees not as lost books of the Bible, but as declassified documents from the heavenly archives. This is not just a semantic distinction, it is a fundamental shift in perspective. To call them lost books implies that they were once part of a fixed canon and were then mistakenly removed. But to call them declassified documents implies something far more intentional and far more prophetically significant. It suggests that this knowledge was deliberately withheld or classified by God for a specific period of history, a time when humanity needed to focus on the foundational story of Adam's fall and Christ's redemption. And it suggests that now, in our own time, in the final act of the divine drama, this classified information is being deliberately and providentially released. The discovery of these texts, their translation, and their rapid dissemination via the internet is not a historical accident. It is a divine act of declassification. It is God releasing previously sealed intelligence reports to a final generation that will need this deeper, more complex understanding of the cosmic war in order to navigate the deceptions of the end times. We do not need to add these books to our Bible. The canonical scripture is complete and sufficient for salvation. But we are now being invited to read these restored, uncensored chronicles as what they truly are, an authorized, divinely preserved intelligence briefing, a strategic appendix to the canonical record released from the celestial archives for a specific purpose in a specific season. They are not a new Bible, but they are a new and desperately needed level of insight into the one we already have. The existence of the heavenly tablets, this divine, pre-written archive of all things, is perhaps the most challenging and reality-altering concept in this entire investigation. It forces us to completely dismantle our modern secular understanding of history and prophecy. In our worldview, history is something that is made. It is a chaotic, unpredictable, and forward-moving series of events shaped by the free will choices of human beings and the random accidents of a material universe. And prophecy, in this view, is a difficult and often inaccurate attempt to predict the outcome of this chaotic process. But the doctrine of the heavenly tablets presents a radically different reality. In this ancient biblical worldview, history is not made, it is performed. It is not a chaotic improvisation. It is the orderly execution of a script that has already been written, from the first act to the last. The future is not an unknown territory to be discovered. It is simply the next unread chapter of a book that has already been completed. This transforms our understanding of prophecy. Prophecy is no longer the difficult and uncertain art of prediction. It is the privileged and sacred act of being allowed to read ahead. When a prophet like Daniel or John is given a vision of the future, they are not being shown a series of probabilities or a potential timeline. They are being taken into the celestial library and allowed to read a few paragraphs from the final chapters of the divine chronicle. This is why biblical prophecy is so precise, so detailed, and so unwavering in its certainty. It is not a guess, it is a report. It is a declassified excerpt from a history that has already been written. This truth is both profoundly humbling and deeply comforting. It is humbling because it reminds us that our human story, for all its drama and apparent freedom, is unfolding within the framework of a sovereign and pre-written divine plan. And it is comforting because it assures us that no matter how chaotic, how terrifying, or how uncertain the events of our time may seem, the final outcome of the story has never been in doubt. The author has already finished the book, and he has guaranteed a victorious ending. This restored understanding of history as a pre-written, divinely authored text, securely stored in the archives of heaven, gives us a new and powerful lens through which to view all human attempts at preserving knowledge. Throughout our history, we have built great libraries, magnificent repositories of our collective wisdom, art, and history. The Library of Alexandria, in its time, was the greatest intellectual achievement of the ancient world, a place that sought to contain all human knowledge under one roof. But the libraries of men are fragile. They are subject to the ravages of time, to the fires of war, and to the ideological censorship of the empires that build them. The Library of Alexandria was burned. Countless other scrolls and records from the ancient world have been lost to decay, to conquest, to the slow, relentless entropy of a fallen world. What we call history is merely the tattered, incomplete, and often deliberately manipulated collection of the few documents that have managed to survive this process of destruction. But the Library of God is different. The celestial archive, the heavenly tablets, is eternal, incorruptible, and perfectly secure. It is a library that cannot be burned, a record that cannot be altered, a history that can never be lost. And this is a truth of immense and profound significance. It means that the full, uncensored story of our universe is not gone. It is simply in safekeeping. The myths of the ancient world are the sad, distorted echoes of the stories that were lost on Earth. But the original perfect chronicles are still pristine in the archives of heaven. The books that were banned by human councils and removed from earthly canons were not annihilated. They were merely exiled from our sight. This creates a profound and humbling contrast. Human knowledge is fragile, temporary, and subject to corruption. But divine knowledge is permanent. The truth is never truly lost. It is only, for a season, made inaccessible to those who are not yet ready to receive it. The knowledge that this divine celestial archive exists is not just a piece of theological trivia. It is a direct and personal invitation. If the history of our world is truly a pre-written story stored in a heavenly library, and if ancient and authoritative texts like the Books of Enoch and Jubilees are in fact declassified excerpts from that library, then we are being offered a profound and unprecedented opportunity. We are being invited into the reading room of God. This is a call to a new kind of spiritual life. It is a call to move beyond a faith that is based solely on the approved, redacted, and often simplified narratives that have been handed down to us by human institutions. It is an invitation to become a student, a researcher, a spiritual archaeologist who is willing to engage with the fuller, more complex, and sometimes more challenging story that is being revealed in these restored, uncensored texts. This does not mean we abandon the canonical Bible. The 66 books of our scripture remain the foundational, inspired, and authoritative core of our faith. But it does mean that we can now read that core text with a new and powerful set of companion documents, a divinely preserved commentary that fills in the historical gaps, illuminates the cosmic context, and decodes the prophetic patterns. To accept this invitation is to make a conscious choice to move from being a passive believer to being an active seeker. It is a declaration that you are no longer content with the milk of the simplified story, but that you are ready for the strong meat of the deeper, uncensored truth. It is to say yes to the opportunity to see your world, your history, and your own place in God's plan with a level of detail and clarity that has been hidden from the vast majority of believers for nearly 2 millennia. The door to the reading room has been opened. The question is, will you step inside? One of the most profound and sobering legacies of the doctrine of the heavenly tablets is the absolute certainty of divine justice. In a world where it so often appears that the wicked prosper, that crimes go unpunished, and that history is written by the victors, the existence of a perfect, unalterable celestial record is a promise that no act of evil will ever be truly forgotten. The heavenly tablets are the ultimate legal record. As Enoch witnessed in the sixth heaven, every deed, every word, every secret thought of both angels and men is being meticulously and permanently transcribed into this divine archive. This is the foundation of the final judgment. It will not be a proceeding based on flawed human testimony or faded memories. It will be a trial based on a perfect, incorruptible, and complete body of evidence. This truth is both terrifying and deeply comforting. It is terrifying for those who believe they can hide their sins in the shadows, for it declares that there are no shadows in the archives of heaven. Every act of injustice, every word of deceit, every secret rebellion of the heart is being recorded with perfect clarity, waiting for the day when the books will be opened. But for those who have suffered injustice, for those who have been the victims of oppression, for those who have cried out for a justice that seems to never come on earth, this truth is a profound comfort. It is the ultimate assurance that their cause has not been forgotten. Their tears have been recorded. Their suffering has been documented. The crimes committed against them have been entered into a record that can never be erased or denied. The existence of the heavenly tablets is a guarantee that while justice on earth may be slow, flawed, and often absent, the justice of heaven is patient, perfect, and absolutely inevitable. No one will get away with anything. The existence of a divine, pre-written history ultimately calls us to a place of profound intellectual and spiritual humility. Our modern, post-Enlightenment age is an age of profound arrogance. We have been taught to believe that human reason is the ultimate measure of all things, that our collective knowledge, our science, and our historical records represent the highest and most accurate understanding of reality. We are a civilization that is deeply in love with its own memory. But the doctrine of the heavenly tablets shatters this arrogance. It reveals that our collective human memory is a flawed, fragmented, and often deliberately manipulated thing. It is a story that has been edited by the victors, censored by the fearful, and eroded by the relentless passage of time. The history we think we know is merely the tattered remnant, the faint and distorted echo of a much larger, much older, and much truer story. To accept the existence of the heavenly tablets is to accept the humbling truth that our history is far grander than our own minds can remember. It is to confess that the ultimate source of truth lies not in the libraries of men, but in the archives of heaven. It is to move from a posture of intellectual pride to one of childlike wonder and reverent inquiry. This is a profoundly liberating realization. It frees us from the impossible burden of trying to make sense of the universe based solely on our own limited and corrupted data. It frees us to become students again, to sit at the feet of a teacher who holds the complete and uncensored chronicle. It is a call to be less certain about our own conclusions and more curious about his revelations. The greatest act of wisdom is not to believe that you have the whole story, but to have the humility to admit that your story is just one small and often misremembered chapter in the great divinely authored book of all things. And so, we can now declare with confidence a truth that directly refutes the claims of both secular history and a fearful, redacted theology. The history of the primordial world, the story of what came before Adam, is not a mystery that is lost to the mists of time. It is not an unsolvable puzzle whose pieces have been permanently scattered. It has not been annihilated. It has only been archived. The great cataclysms that wiped the slate clean on Earth did not and could not touch the primary source documents that are held in the celestial library. The campaign of censorship by the later gatekeepers, as successful as it was in creating a global amnesia, was ultimately powerless to destroy the original record. They could remove the books from our earthly canon, but they could not remove them from the library of heaven. This is the ultimate hope for the spiritual archaeologist. We are not digging in the dark. We are not chasing after ghosts and shadows. We are engaged in a work of restoration, guided by the declassified excerpts from a real, existing, and perfectly preserved historical archive. The books of Enoch and Jubilees are not just ancient fantasies. They are the first fruits of a great end times unveiling, a divine act of opening the archives to a generation that has been starved for the truth. The history of the pre-Adamic world is not lost. It is simply stored in a different location, a higher and more secure one. And now, in our time, the doors to that archive, the covers of that forbidden library, are beginning to creak open. The story is not gone. It is simply and finally being told. Our investigation is now complete. We began with a planet suffering from a profound and unexplained amnesia, a world haunted by the ghosts of a history it could not remember. We followed the trail of clues from the impossible ruins of the Earth to the fragmented memories of our global myths. We saw how both the physical and the psychological evidence pointed to a great forgotten chapter in our own origin story. We then unsealed the testimony of the silenced witnesses, the books of Enoch and Jubilees, and in their pages we found the key to the entire mystery. We discovered the existence of a celestial library, a divine archive known as the Heavenly Tablets, where the complete and uncensored history of the universe is permanently and securely stored. We learned that the history of the pre-Adamic world was never truly lost, but was simply classified, held in secret by God Himself for reasons of profound pedagogical and legal wisdom. And we saw how the books of Enoch and Jubilees are not fantasies, but are divinely authorized, declassified excerpts from that very archive. We are no longer the orphans of history, disconnected from our own primordial past. We have discovered the existence of our family's great library. We have learned that the full story of our origins, in all its terrifying and glorious detail, has been preserved. And we have understood that its re-emergence in our time is not an accident, but an invitation to move beyond the redacted summary and to begin the great and thrilling work of reading the complete and unabridged story of God's cosmic plan. The myths of the ancient world are not lost history. They are what remains on Earth after the primary source documents have been safely returned to the celestial archives. The gatekeepers of secular and religious tradition have told us that our ancient past is an unsolvable mystery, a story whose beginning has been permanently erased. But the hidden truth is that the past is not a mystery. It is a forbidden library. And in our generation, for reasons of profound prophetic significance, God Himself is beginning to issue the library cards. The existence of the heavenly tablets is not just a theological concept, it is a declaration. It is a declaration that truth is permanent. It is a declaration that history has a purpose. And it is a declaration that no act of human censorship or cosmic cataclysm can ever truly destroy the record of God's unfolding plan. To know that this archive exists is to be forever changed. It is to live with the humbling and awe-inspiring knowledge that your own small story is a single recorded line in a book of infinite pages, a book that was written before the foundation of the world. And so the final question is not one of speculation, but of participation. Now that you know that a perfect, incorruptible record of all things exists in a divine, heavenly library, how does this change the way you think about the importance of history, of prophecy, and of your own recorded life? Let us know in the comments below.